when I wrote this book, I wrote 140,000 words. They cut it down to 80, and I had to cut quite a bit of it. And I had to cut quite a bit of Maclean parts out of it too. And I'm a 76-year-old man, so there's a lot of politically incorrect things that have to be taken out. And I'm a very bad speller. Ever I got to high school, you could have sorted me out with spelling. And so they all had to be taken out. And a few defamatory things had to be taken out, which I was quite disappointed about. It's quite nice to defame a couple of people, but you can't because it's the lawyers, you know. And so when I finally finished the book, and like I started it and I did nothing else for about 4 months. I read this book. And then when it was finally in my hands as a physical book, I went up to, we live in Mossman, I went up to the bookshop in Mossman earlier Saturday morning, and it's quite a big bookshop, and both windows were absolutely full of the books, you know. I was quite overcome by it, I suppose. I was just standing there looking at all the books, and a couple of girls went past, a couple of women went past who must have been down in Fitness First or something, and they said, "Oh, Ken Doan," looking at all the Ken Doan books, and I said, "Yeah, well, I've never written a book before, so it's absolutely amazing to see them there like that." I'm quite stunned by that. And she said, because we had a little poster that went with the book, and it was the highlights of some of the things, like my arguments with Kerry Packer, or my trips in Turkey, my affair with Princess Margaret, which we might deal with later. And there was a bit that said, "the kindy crap." And this woman said to me, "What's this about the kindy crap?" And I said, "Well, once when I was 5 in Belmore, and I crapped myself and they sent me home from school. And then this girl said, "Oh, don't worry, I weed myself yesterday at the gym." Too much information. Nice.
Like you say, we've all been there.
Well, that's right. Yeah, Maclean, 1945. We came a lot of unmade road even to get up to Maclean, especially the last part from Cross Harbour up to Grafton. That is endless gum trees with the light coming through them. And then you come down around the river and you see the shape of the hill and you come into Maclean. It was great. We lived in the Argyle Hotel for the first few months, I think, until we could find somewhere to live. It was just after the war. And I didn't see my father until I was 5. Like a lot of kids of my age, your parents would have been away at the war, so you don't know them at that point in time. You know, I was very close to my father. I loved him, but at the start, I think it's a slightly strange relationship because suddenly this person comes into your life, someone called Dad, that I'd only ever seen photographs beside my mother's bed. Anyway, so we were in the Argyle Hotel, my father looking for something to do, to work. He wanted to try and buy a bus run to come down through Lawrence, through the back. We couldn't afford it. But he was able to buy a truck. He borrowed some money from a guy who just lived up on the hill there called Chris King, very nice man. They had a refrigerator. I've never seen anybody had a refrigerator. No one had a refrigerator. Anyway, Chris King had a refrigerator. Grew gerbers in his front lawn. Biggest gerbers I'd ever seen. And the Wingfields lived not far along from Chris King on that corner. Anyway, we then found a house in McLaughlin Street. It's not there anymore, unfortunately. It was burnt down. It was really sad to see that. I came back with our kids when they were little, and I've told them a lot about Maclean over the years. Wanted to show them the house. The house is not there. But and my father, he was here we lived here for 5 years, but after 3 years, he became the secretary of the hospital when it was built up there. And so we built a house on the next high hill above the hospital, and what that street's called. And we never moved into that house, which I could smell the wood of that house. Made by a bloke called Dick Fitcroft, I remember his name. Anyway, we never moved into it, and I was on a cruise somewhere during my recent some exotic part of the world, and this bloke came up and he said, "Oh, my uncle or something lived in your house in Maclean." I said, "Oh, no one else lived in our house in Maclean, but I said, a house in the Lockman Street." He said, "Oh, I must have got it wrong." And then I thought about it. Well, he lived in the house that we never lived in. It's a lovely house looking out down across the valley, across towards Harwood, looking north. Yeah, it was great. A lot of mucking around. I think it's very important. I talked recently, I did a talk the other day in Parliament House in Sydney, and I was talking about the need to have part of your life mucking around. We've got 3 grandchildren, they've got so many things to do after school. Well, that's lovely. You've got to have mucking around. It should be a subject. It should be a subject. If I'd have got to high school, you'd have taught me mucking around. That's right. Very, very important that you do that. And so for me as an only child living here, of course there's no television. And I was talking on the ABC recently, and I was saying that in some ways, apart from my parents, who were very, very helpful, I owe a bit of debt to ABC Radio, because they had, in the afternoon, they had a program called The Argonauts, and if you were a kid, you listened to the radio. And again, some of you here are old enough to remember, radios were big. Radio came in a big cabinet, and it was warm. So as a little kid, you could actually sit against the radio because of the valves, you know. Mum and Dad would be off playing golf, because my dad and a few of his mates started the golf course up here when it was a 9-hole golf course before it was 18-hole golf course. And they'd be away all day. And like most of the kids in town, no one's closing the doors, no one's locking it in, you're just mucking around, going up to the lookout, going fishing, or there was no swimming pool or any grand things like that. Just mucking around, waiting for them to come back. Very safe town. I've never had any feeling of danger at this time. And yes, Annette was mentioning the Harlem Gathering. It was great. It was great sounds, great. And they had a pet show. No, they had a bit of a kind of fight where the big camphor laurel trees, which I sadly hear now a lot, are knocked down. That's where the bars were and the rowing club. And I remember going down there. We had a dog, that's called Peter, brown and white Kelpie. And I saw in a stall a jar of jam. It was Rosella and Passion Fruit jam. I've never seen anything quite. It was unbelievably beautiful. I knew my mother would like it. And I think it was 2 shillings. Well, I didn't have 2 shillings, I didn't have money. But they had a competition for kids and their pets. And so I thought, oh, I'll go in that. You know? And I said to the lady in the jam store, hang on to that. I'm coming back. I'm going to buy that jam. So I went down to get the dog, and Peter, a brown and white dog, and he'd been lying in the flood mud underneath the little wharf part. So instead of being brown and white, he was kind of brown and white, but a lot of stripes of flood mud all over it. And I remember I had a striped jacket, a striped t-shirt on. We won second prize. This kid who looked like his dog. We won enough money to go back and buy the jam. And I had to, my dad had to kill the dog, unfortunately, he didn't let us know. I write also in the book about how both my father and I were accused of murder in Maclean, which is surprising. My father was going to golf. He's just going around that corner over to the McFarlane Bridge, and a guy on a motorbike came the other way, a bit wide, and my dad knocked him off his motorbike. and this guy broke his arm, I think. So the next day at school, I remember all the kids saying to me, "You're a murderer, your father's a murderer." Because kids always going to take it a little bit further. I thought, this guy broke an arm, it's hardly murder. But it had me worried for a while. And we had to go up to Grafton. My father had to go to court. So it was, in fact, when I think about this time of the year, it was Jacaranda time. And so we went up in the truck. Peter and I were on the back, and my dad had to go to court. And I knew he wasn't a murderer, but I thought, geez, I wonder if he's going to come back to the truck. And I used to sit in his lap sometimes, and he'd let me steer the truck. But I knew if I had to try and drive from Grafton to the plane, it's 28 miles, my feet can't even reach the pedals. What am I going to do? And it was really hot, and so I remember I got up in the back of the truck, had a big tarpaulin, and I was lying, and my father bought me a big packet of Arnott's orange cream biscuits. I can remember. Never since that time. And Peter and I got on the back, and I was trying to catch bits of jacaranda blossoms that fell down, and I was eating these. I ate them all. But fortunately, I didn't have to drive the truck. My father came back, and we were driving, and I had to stop somewhere in Ulmarra and be violently ill because I'd eaten too many Arnott's cream biscuits. I never had one since that time. So then a couple of months later, I was accused of murder. I thought I might have murdered something. We were playing cricket on the old school, in the primary school. There was an old tennis court down in the corner near, I must have been about third class to fourth class. And we were playing cricket. That's like 30 kids who were playing cricket. Everybody desperate to have a ball, and everybody desperate to have a bat. Anyway, I had a bat. And I missed the ball. And so I went another guy to the hospital. And I saw something that absolutely shocked me to the core. One of the most saddest and shocking things that I'd ever seen, because on the hospital bed was this kid, Ross Holland, and he had just a simple bandage around his head. But sitting on the bed next to him was a girl who I thought was my girlfriend, Patty Morrison, who lived over there, feeding him lemonade out of a glass with a straw in it, and showing him a comic. The girl that I thought was my love of my life, bloody torturing this kid and giving him lemonade and reading him a comic. So at least I didn't murder him.
She's alive.
She died recently, that girl. She married a bloke called one of the Farlow boys, and they had a cane farm down near the Harwood Bridge. Yeah, that Farlow. Isn't it strange? When I started to write this book, I could remember more about Maclean and more about my childhood than I could about last Thursday, which I think is about age, isn't it? About age. But it's the second chapter in the book. And then it goes on, it goes on, so there are all the kids that I went to school with. It's Maclean. I can remember a lot of the kids' names in that class. And so we're only here 5 years, but very important years. And then we moved to Springwood briefly because my grandfather had a stroke, and my father left to look after her, and we lived in Springwood for 2 years, and I went to school in Katoomba. I liked the train. You went by train, which was fantastic way to go to school. And we've, over the years, done huge amounts of long train travel through Siberia, through China, through all kinds of places. I like trains very much, and I'm sure it came from that Springwood experience. Then we moved down to Mossman, went to Mossman High, and they didn't teach art drawings, which was kind of annoying because I really wanted to do art. It's got a very good reputation for art now. In those days, it was a segregated school, boys on one side and girls on the other. And Judy went to, it was called Mossman Domestic Home Science. That's what the girls' school was called, and the boys. And the school was joined together. And the only time you saw girls was at recess in the morning, right? Because there was a kind of tuck shop that served girls on one side and boys on the other. So you could only see parts of girls. You could see food in the foreground and parts of girls in the background. It's had a profound effect on my life, I think, in that particular situation. But no chance of studying art. But so I got the intermediate certificate when I was 14. I was quite a bright child, and they allowed me to leave school because I wanted to go to art school. No, it's not a history of that. Although here, my mother used to get a subscription to Saturday Evening Post, the American magazine. And you have to remember that we're talking at a time that magazines were in sepia. Magazines were in black and white. There were no colour magazines. So when the Saturday Evening Post would arrive up here, I can still remember the excitement of opening it and seeing the colours and seeing the covers. Absolutely beautiful. Anyway, back to Maclean, back to Mossman. So I got a special exemption to leave school to go to art school. I was 14 and a half. The thing, not the only thing, but one of the things that excited me most was I was going to see a totally nude woman. I hadn't seen one up to that point in time. I figured at 14 and a half, I could probably handle this. And of course, for the first year at art school, you don't have a life class. You don't draw from the model. You have to draw from statues and plaster casts and things like that. So it's kind of probation period. And then in the second year, so I was 15, at the first life class. Started at 9:30. I was there about 20 to 7. So you have a circle like this, the model comes in, takes up a pose, you start to draw. So you have a 1-minute pose, and then 5-minute pose, and then eventually leading up to a much longer pose up until lunchtime. And the art master goes around the outside and he leans over and he corrects your drawing, corrects the anatomy and everything like that. And he never, ever came and stopped by me. And I was really getting very worried about it because I can draw quite well. And I didn't know what was happening, why wasn't he talking to me? And at about 5 to 12, just before the class finished, he eventually came over. And he leaned over and he said quietly to me, so the other students could hear, he said, "Don't you think it's about time you attempted the head?" That's such a long time ago. That's a long time ago. Okay, so after Mossman, after art school, I started a small business in Rose Street, a design business. I went to Japan. I always thought Japan and Australia would have very close association. And yet, I am obviously of a generation, I used to hear the most horrific things about the Japanese, because there were quite a few young boys from Maclean who had been interned by the Japanese. So as boys, we couldn't think of anything more frightening or shocking or cruel than the Japanese now. 70 years later, I have a lot of Japanese friends. We had a lot of big exhibitions in Japan. But I first went there, it must have been 1961, something like that. And I actually was speaking the other night at the Japanese consul residence, giving a talk. And I said there were 3 things that I was really interested in going to Japan. I was interested in contemporary Japanese design and traditional Japanese design. And as I wasn't married, I was always very interested in girls with long, straight, dark hair. Well, there's a lot of girls in Japan with long, straight, dark hair. Of 51 years, you can see what colour your hair changes if you've been married to me for that length of time. But it's been a long association with Japan, and the new Japanese consul has just left Sydney. He's a very nice guy. And I did an exhibition the year before last about the Japanese attack on Sydney Harbour in 1942. And it was quite an important exhibition. I wasn't glorifying war. It was a very brave thing that these young Japanese boys did in little midget submarines and attack. So I was asked whether I would take the governor, David Hurley, around the exhibition and showing the pictures, which I was very happy to do. But the week before, Judy and I had been at dinner at the Japanese consul, and I was telling him about the exhibition, and he's a very well-educated man, he's a consul. He didn't know that the Japanese attacked Sydney Harbour. He knew that they came south, and we've had an assistant, a Japanese assistant for 30 years. She didn't know either. It was never taught in Japan. That whole part of their history has conveniently been kind of left out. So anyway, I said, look, next week I'm taking the Governor General around, and I think it'd be really nice if the consul came as well. So we did. We had this amazing exhibition. Just the governor and his wife and the consul and his wife and me to show them these pictures. And as I said, they weren't glorifying war. And Sydney has a sister city relationship with Nagoya. Sydney gave Nagoya one of my paintings, Nagoya gave us a grand piano. And Nagoya are very keen to have this exhibition about the submarines. But because there's a bit of argy-bargy over the last year or so about who will buy the new submarines from, I think we're buying them from the French, but the Japanese were unhappy that they weren't chosen. So it's a bit of a political hot potato to make. So whether the picture goes to Japan, I'm not sure. I'm jumping all over the place now because I never know what I'm going to talk about. But thinking about that, next week I've got an exhibition opening in the National Portrait Gallery, and it's called The Popular Pet Show, and it's artists and their pets. And so I've got paintings of our last, they're all dead, of our last 4 dogs. Never imagine your dogs would end up in the National Portrait. Just never, ever imagine it. And the first dog, apart from Peter, which is here, Peter's not in. The first dog was a Cocker Spaniel that we bought before we had children, and was with us for a long time. Then the second dog is a dog called Spot. I'm sure there must be a picture of Spot here somewhere. Anyway, Spot was the little black and white dog that spent most of the time with me when I was making the type you can see. That's me and Spot. It's a black and white dog with any colour. Anyway, it was a lovely little dog, and we had it from the size of a sausage. What was I talking about so far? Oh yeah, he's going to be in the National Portrait Gallery. And years ago I was asked to do a Christmas stamp. And they wanted the kind of 3 wise men, the traditional Christmas things in the manger. So I did a little, and it's very tiny. I did a picture of the manger, the cows, the baby Jesus, and everything like that. If you look very carefully, Spot is in the background. It's really tiny, but he's in there. And he deserved to be there. He should be there. And again, with this exhibition next week, there's a painting in there called Madonna and Dog, and it's Judy holding Spot the dog with the kind of Madonna halo around there. And a woman from Canberra who's manning the exhibition, she said, in a nice way, I certainly can't remember any dogs. That leads me to think that we used to have to go to Sunday school up here, up this road that goes up towards the hill, the mountain. There was a really small brick building beside the church that we had to go to on Sunday morning, put on a tie, had to dress up. Hot, bloody hot day. You don't go to Sunday school. You're doing anything not to go to Sunday school. Although I quite like the colouring in. That was the nicest part about it. They just tiny things. And then, of course, the minute Sunday school finished, he'd be off. He'd be running down here, jumping in the bikes, going straight down to go fishing or go across in the punt. Fish, there was a really good place to fish between the punt and this way towards the... And you know, I found out the other day that Peter Doyle, the guy who has Doyle's fish shop, very famous fish shop, he was the fishing instructor, inspector. He was the fishing inspector in Maclean for quite a few years, which I never knew Steve, unfortunately, for a long time. Let's jump ahead. So I went to Japan, I came back to Sydney, I went then to America. Most Australians went to England, but I went to America. I went first of all to Mexico, and I took a bus. I went to Mexico, I went to Los Angeles, I got work there. I took a bus across America. It tells you two things, doesn't it? It tells you how beautiful America is all the way across and how insular America is in the middle part of America. I was hired in New York by a very, very big advertising agency. I never particularly wanted to work for a very big advertising agency, but it was an interesting thing to do. It was the time of the Mad Men kind of years of advertising. Interesting. I couldn't get a green card to stay, so this particular agency, which brought over the Thompsons, wanted to know whether I would go to their London office. Well, I went to London on my own stay. I didn't accept the job. I looked around. I had a couple of good offers, and in the end, Thompsons did. I ended up at Thompsons, and I was really glad that I did. They were the #1 agency in London in those days, and England was still quite established and quite a kind of class-defined society in that day. So if you're an Australian, you could only get by on your talent, you know. No one thought of Maclean's not like Eton, you know. You couldn't say, that's what but if you could do it, you could do it. And a lot of times, being Australians, you could break through some particular barriers. We became very, very good friends with a man whose father kept the Queen's Stamp collection. I asked us to go shooting one weekend up in Scotland. He lived in a castle. The last thing I'd shot was at the Maclean show, basically, with a BB gun. Shooting pheasant wasn't part of our background, but you know, you found yourselves in strange situations. I worked for a while, art directors, which I usually work with, writers. I worked with Dylan Thomas's son, well, very nice boy, again, not with us, heavy drinker like his father. I convinced him eventually to come to Australia after 5 years. He was hesitant to come to Australia. He wanted to know, are there any weedy people in Australia? He said, I don't want to go to somewhere where there are really big, strong, big bronze blokes. Are there any little wimpy guys? Very much a little wimpy guy. I had a really good brain, I said. I got plenty of wimpy guys in Australia. So he came to Australia and lived for another 5 years, but that's jumping ahead. Go back to, he and I had we worked on the Bacardi account. And I designed a whole series of ads to be shot underwater in the Caribbean. The first Bond movies had just come out. And that seemed to me to be the image that Bacardi should have. So I designed these, it was a deal with Coke. So it was going to be Bacardi and Coke. And I'd drawn a coral head, a bottle of Bacardi and a bottle of Coke, started a lot of fish swimming around it. They wanted to know, can you do that? I'm Australian, of course I can do it. Well, we didn't know how to dive. Judy and I had to go and learn to dive in the winter in England in a hotel pool so that we could get our diving certificate. So we flew to Nassau, we'd get a boat, we'd go and we'd do this shot. So to do it, you have to find a coral head that's within, say, a metre of the surface, because you need the light coming down. You need to stick the bottles in the right place. You need to get a can of, say, tuna or something, sardines, put it where the camera can't see it, stab it with a knife so little bits of fish oil goes through the water so it can attract the little fish around the bottles. Nowadays, you can do it in a garage in Almara. You don't have to go there. Now you can do it anywhere. But in those days, you had to do it. And because we did it, and we did it well, and the Bacardi family lived in a house called Bacardi on the Rocks, and the deal was that I would go from Nassau to Bermuda to show them the pictures if they liked them. So for 5 years, every year when we lived in England, we'd make another Bacardi commercial. We came back here to Dargana, we went to Antigua. You can do anything for an advertising line if it works well for it. And that led us to working on the Campari account, where I worked with Bill Oddie and Tim Taylor, who went on to become the Goodies. And we made 6 cinema commercials for them. I did the image, the boys did the words. They were good, they were very good. They won the award for the best cinema commercials in the world in 1968. And so we were absolutely thrilled by it. So then, I had to work out what we do next. So I wanted to do a series of full-page ads where we would get some of the great photographers working in London at that time, like David Bailey, Norman Parkinson, and just allow them to shoot for Campari, do whatever they wanted, it would be signed Campari by Parkinson. Anyway, the real coup would be is if you could get Anthony Armstrong Jones, who'd just recently married Princess Margaret. So Thompson set up a lunch, and I was given the job of broaching the subject to him as to whether he would start doing photography commercially again. You know, he'd become Lord Snowden. Anyway, he's a nice bloke. Chatted about things. Fortunately, he'd seen the films, he knew that they were good, he liked them very much, and he said, well, look, why don't you come to my place next Thursday afternoon and we'll discuss it. So, he lives in Kensington Palace, so I got in the cab outside of Berkeley Square. I'm wearing a suit, I've got a tie, I'll be ready to toilet better every 10 minutes. So anyway, I get in the cab and I say to the guy, Kensington Palace, please. And he says, oh, Kensington Palace Hotel, come, is it? Because there is the hotel in the corner as you go to the palace. I said, no, it's the palace. So you go up to the palace and yeah, you're expected and you're shown into Snowden's study. It's a small room. This and there's quite nice photos of the wall of his and Margaret's marriage. And Judy and I hadn't been married very long, so I knew everything about his wedding. He knew absolutely bugger all about ours. But at least, we started to talk about it. And there's a little Nolden painting on the wall. We talked about that. There's some pictures of Japan. I've been to Japan. We talked about that. Anyway, he said to me, have you heard about the movie Platform that he designed? Well, fortunately I had. He designed a kind of a little flat platform with a little handle and a motor on it, that you could take whatever chair you were comfortable with and you could put it on it, and you had some degree of mobility. He said, I'd love you to have a look at the design of it. I said, well, I'm not in industrial design, but obviously you can't say no. So he calls the butler, and the butler brings the platform in, and we take the chair from behind his desk and we put it on. He said, drive it around. I'm not mechanically blessed. It's not a great thing. So you have to very carefully go up the bookshelf, back to his desk, desperately not to knock anything over. But anyway, the phone rings. He's on the phone, and I go over this bookshelf, and the door opens, and Princess Margaret walks in. Well, it really gives me a surprise because obviously it's her house, and she can come in whenever she likes, But I'm surprised, and so I got up and I did like half limbo, half curtsy, something signifying some degree of respect. And she says to me in quite a nice voice, she says, who are you? And I heard myself say, I am an Australian. And it stopped like that. No, I'm an Australian art director, I'm here working with your husband and we're going to do some fantastic, I'm an Australian. covered it. If I farted, if my hand went down the front of a blouse, if I was sick, I'm an Australian. Cover every eventuality. Anyway, I talked to her for a while, and he got off the phone, and they started to talk, and they started to have a bit of an argument, and it was a bit embarrassing, really, because he wanted to go to Wales the next day, and she didn't want to go. Anyway, I was just standing there, and they were getting more and more heated, and anyway, eventually she kind of stormed out. He and I talked for a bit more about the job, and I went home. We lived in a little flat in Chelsea those days. And of course I was talking to Judy about the whole experience of being in the palace, and some friends of ours called and said, look, why don't we come round and play cards? And Judy said, oh yeah, come round, at least we'll stop Ken talking about being Princess Margaret. So anyway, they came round, we had dinner, we played cards, small flat, 2 rooms. And the phone was in this room, the room was the bed was, we played cards out there, and the phone rang at midnight. So I got up from the thing, you think it's got to be some kind of bad news. So I picked up the phone and they said, is that Ken Bone? I said, yeah. He said, 2 Lincoln Street, Chelsea. I said, yeah. He said, look, we've got a very urgent telegram for you, but we can't deliver it until the morning. But he said, I could read it to you over the phone. And he was thinking terrible things. And I said, oh, look, you better read it to me. And I still have this telegram. And this guy's reading it. It says, can't get you out of my mind. Must see you alone. Side entrance of the palace. And it's signed. And so the male ego thinks, I'll have to go. You get some kind of stamp on your week, I'll have to go. So I go back into the room where she witnessed on the phone, darling. And before I could concoct some answer, they all started to laugh because they sent me the telegram. They sent me the telegram. Man, you can't trust them, the egos. No idea. Yeah, anyway, I enjoyed that. I like that. So we were there for 5 years. We had a fantastic time in England. It was good. In the end, it just gets too cold. We needed to come home, even though we'd come home once and gone back again because they said they'd send us around the world if I'd come back for another 3 months, 18 months, which we were very happy to do that. But when we eventually came back to Australia, we bought a house in Mossman. I worked again for J. Walter Thompson, where Bryce Court, I took over Bryce Courtney's job when he left. Good writer, Bryce, good storyteller. And a lot in those days, a lot of people that you might see, like Peter Carey was in the business, Philip Adams, Bruce Beresford, the film director. Advertising was the training ground where a lot of those people who you might be conscious of their work now, that's where they start. That's where they got their jobs. That's where they learned their particular trade. But I got to the very ripe age of 35, and I was already painting. I already had a studio at home, but I'd never shown anything to anybody. And it was on a Sunday, late Sunday afternoon. We were on the beach in Vanuatu, and I happened to be talking to the late Peter Brock, and he was talking to me about motor racing and about how passionate he was about it. And I realised I wasn't passionate about advertising, even though I could do it and I was good at it. I was passionate about painting. So I had to devote my life to that. So Monday morning I went in and I resigned from the agency. And you know, I had a good salary. We had 1 child. We had a house in Mossman. We had a mortgage. I was 35, and I still did some freelance work because I needed to be able to support us. And then when I was 40, I had my first exhibition. So no one knows, apart from a few old friends in Maclean, no one knows what the hell I was doing before 40. But then at 40, I made, in the first exhibition, I made 12 t-shirts to give to the press, which all of Sydney hung. People liked them. People liked them a lot. So I made some more. Then I thought we need to have a shop, so we got a shop. that led to having 15 shops. But when you have 15 shops, you can't make in Australia anymore. You have to make it in China, and you have to order 3,000 units instead of 300 units. And you have to have managers, and you have to have a structure. I would have to talk to people. It's just getting in the way. So even though we built that up to quite a big business, and it was enjoyable, and we're all working together, the four of us, Hassan and Dora and Juno, we're all working in it. It wasn't the trend. We didn't want to get any bigger. It was taking us into areas we didn't want to do, even though we were good at it. I mean, we won the Grand Award for fashion in Australia, and yet we weren't a fashion house. And so we had some wonderful times, but now we've got rid of all the shops. We have one gallery in Sydney. We still make some, or Judy still makes some things that top that she's wearing at the moment that comes from a painting. With modern technology, you can take the painting and you can turn it into something. And I just concentrate on painting. That's all we do. That's all we need to do. And all started in Maclean, I reckon. It all started in Maclean. So that's why I always go with Any questions? Anything you want to talk about? Any secrets? I find a few secrets in here.
You mentioned before about political correctness that they just didn't want in your book. And it just seems to how Australia's gone.
Yeah, I know.
You cannot say the truth.
Yeah, that's right. It's frightening, isn't it?
Oh, terrible.
It's gone too far.
Yeah.
But legally, there's
It's
some things that
just-
you just move on.
What art college?
It's at East Sydney Tech, which is now the National Art School, and it's a good school. And there's a bit of it's in Darlinghurst,
That's
in the old
the
jail.
old Darlinghurst, yeah.
Yeah, the old Darlinghurst jail. They're thinking of moving it. Hopefully they won't. It's the last practical-based art school. There's a lot of art schools now that teach theory rather than drawing. There's nothing wrong with that, but I just think it's like, if you want to be a pianist, go to the conservatory. If you want to be a pianist, you need to know where the notes are. So I get rather bored, but you go to some exhibitions in Sydney and you'll find 10 badly tuned television sets, a pair of fireman's boots, a half-eaten sandwich, and a big wall text telling you that it's a work of art. Well, it may not be. It might be just a load of crap, actually.
Some of them are.
Well, sometimes I find, like, sometimes in country shows where you will find work by people who might be considered as naive artists. No, I don't like the word. But they are works of great love, great honesty. I find wonderful little things. But also, art's half a conversation. You can't add it up. I mean, you know, I'm up here to judge the drawing exhibition. It's really a awful task because I hate to. There's going to be lots of good things in it. And in the end, how can you judge something? All it can be is my opinion on the day of those works. It's not accountancy. You can't add it up. I think the only criteria that I can bring to it is that if you, in your house where you've all got some imagery in your house, some of them you still look at and some of them you like, others you don't like. You don't see them anymore. You don't see them anymore. So you may as well get some new things, and it may be better to get things that you don't totally understand on the first viewing. Maybe it's better to have things that you find things within. It gives you pleasure over time. You know, but it's such a personal thing. You can't even understand how somebody else sees another colour.
Thank you, Ken. That lovely talk, really wonderful about your life before you
Left
Maclean,
the security of Maclean.
Yes, it's a lovely place, there's no doubt about that. But I think, and I've got a daughter who's an artist, and she's a minimalistic and does sculpture more than anything else. But I find, and my mother, and I think it must come through our genes somehow, but my mother was English, and of course she's passed away, of course. But she was the first person to paint roses on curtains, and they took off in England.
Sure.
And she didn't get any credit for that.
Yeah.
But so I think there's a bit of art sort of through the family. But I think with your art, the most amazing thing that comes through to me is the colour done, Ken. I mean, some of the stuff that you paint, I think, oh, what did you put it like that for? But it's the colour. And I think you brought into the art world an amazing sort of, how can you put it, awareness of how colour is so important in our lives.
I'm very pleased. I'm very pleased with that. It's funny, isn't it, because the colour of the people have said these kinds of things that I might have taken the colour was always here. You know, when I talk about the gerbers, I can remember the intensity of the colour of the gerbers up on Chris King's front lawn. Or when you saw that kind of French ultramarine blue, you see the hyacinths floating down the river in the flood, you know, that intense green and the colour of the hyacinths themselves and the kind of khaki. The colour's always there. It's always there. It's just making people often about the duvet cups that we used to do for Sheridan. Everybody seemed to have them and people respond to them very well. Anyway, the Sheridan company just asked whether we would do, so we're just considering whether we would do 2 new ones, because when I first started, when people first saw the things, they really liked them. Then there's more things. They really loved them. Then there's already almost too many things. James, we'll start. Then a younger generation comes along and they think, wow, that's absolutely fantastic. Now, we're about there on the wheel now. We're going around again. We're going around again. And people are really understanding what I did, because for a long time, the fact that I had my own gallery kind of went against me a little bit. But I see it like a chef owning a restaurant. It's very straightforward. They're the paintings, I hope you like them. Whereas most Australians, it's too big a generalisation, but some Australians think that artists should be dope-ridden, starving and dead. Now, if you could do all those things, you've got the trifecta. That's it. I'm just trying to bypass at least 2.5 of those.
I just had a question. How did your parents feel about when you first decided that you wanted to go to art college?
Look, I'm very, very grateful for them, because we come from Maclean, no artists in the family. My class intermediate wanted to leave school. I remember I went with my father to the education department. And so I credit them with, I wouldn't have allowed my kids or our kids to leave school that early. But they did. And of course, your mother's always encouraging. You know, my mother would run across Red Square in Moscow if she saw somebody wearing one of my bloody sweatshirts and scream, "My son did that." But so you can't just you can't rely on praise from your parents or your aunties or things like that. It's got to be slightly way. But that's the key to it. And I think that if you have a child that has, you know, very like James Morrison, a good mate of mine, it's a tough business, though. Very tough to make money out of art. Very, very tough. And I've never had a government grant, nor would I seek one. I don't think anybody owes me a living, but it's a very tough business. But even if it just teaches you to use your eyes to see things, to get enjoyment out of visual images, you know. Look at the pretty colours on that dress. You bought it because you like colour. This lady here, look at this wonderful violet colour. Wonderful colour. All colours are great. Depends what you put them. Hey, it's like musical notes. You put one against the other, it tells you something about the colour.
Shades, the colour and the depth.
The exhibition at the Portrait Gallery, how long is that on?
It actually goes for about 3-4 months. I think it's quite a big exhibition. I've got 11 pictures in it, including the 4 dogs, and set over 6 Thursday. Yeah, they've already got 2 of my portraits down there, which I'm pleased. But it's a journey. It's a journey. Canberra, the National Portrait Gallery in Canberra.
Do you still have your shop in Georgetown?
No, we only have one gallery there, but within the gallery there's some silk tops that Judy and Camilla have done, and some swimwear, and some t-shirts, just a very tiny range of things. Or you can see it on the internet. I don't have a computer, I don't know.
I used to have to walk past it going to the ferry for
Oh,
work,
right.
and the Japanese would stop you all the time and hand you their camera. The first time I couldn't work out what they wanted, and just say Kendon, and they wanted you to take their photo in front of the shop where they could see your name in the photo as well.
Look, what happened in Japan is that a guy came, not long after we'd opened the shop, a guy came from Tokyo because he'd seen so many people get off the plane in Tokyo without a bag. And he was the editor of a magazine company. And he asked me whether I'd do the cover of a magazine called Hanako. It was a new magazine that they were just about to bring out, aimed at young Japanese women, 20s to 30s. Young Japanese women were changing Japanese society at that time because they'd been much more outgoing. They didn't want their husbands to just, go to the pachinko parlors or get drunk at night and come home and they'd be the little subservient Japanese wife. They were really changing their society. So it was a magazine aimed at them. And this guy asked me whether I would do the cover. And so, yeah, I'm very happy to do it. And would I write the word Hanako, which is like Susan's, like a woman's name. So I said, sure, I wrote it. My artwork was on the cover of that magazine every week for 13 years in Tokyo. Every week. 13 years. No one has ever done this in the world. 13 years. And sometimes I might do something specific for them if it was 100. But most of the time I'd just send them up, or one of my assistants would just send them up whatever paintings I was working on. And they would put it. Anyway, it spawned a sister magazine called Hanako West, which came out of Osaka. And it's hard to see, but in that picture there are a whole series of Hanako covers. So it meant that I had very wide exposure in Tokyo, especially of my artwork. That's how they knew about me. And then that led to, they put out a car, Hanako car, they put out chocolates, they had Hanako. And every time they want you to do something, it has to be a business-like arrangement. And even now, that it's now much more a fashion magazine, so they don't use my artwork on the cover, which is fine. But they use the logo that I had written. And they pay me for it every time. Not a huge amount of money, but it's the Japanese understanding of the importance of the artist's hand. The artist made that mark. If I'd have written Woman's Weekly for Kerry Packer, he'd have given me, $1.50 and a kick in the bum, and that would have been it forever. It's the Japanese, a different kind of thing.
You credit your, like you said, you wanted to go to Japan as in terms of after you left art school, I think it was, and you said that had a big influence on you. Do you credit the way you paint in your own paintings as having a lot to do with Japanese design?
A little bit. I think you get influenced by every single thing that you see. Whether it's Dutch still, we had lunch yesterday with a very nice Dutch film director who's made a great program about Van Gogh. And I showed him the first serious art book that I bought in Sydney. It was a book on Van Gogh, so you can get it. But you could say, everything that you see. When we drove down here this morning, there's a big fire. I don't know whether it's a cane fire. I don't think it's a cane fire.
It's a bushfire.
Bushfire.
It's a bushfire.
It's beautiful. It's like going back into time. You know, go down through Elmira, all of the trees, like film set one after another. So you can be influenced by every single thing that you see. It all goes in there. I just think in the time in which we live, art should be about pleasure. When you see Mosul on television, when you see really frightening things, like Donald Trump, or suicide bombers, when you're sitting there having dinner and your corner of your eye, like a suicide bomber, a few kids blown up, and I'm the goodwill ambassador to UNICEF. We've been to refugee camps, we've seen terrible things. But art, I think, should be about pleasure. Should be about pleasure. Yeah. Yes.
You've been taught always in a very academical way, and did you have any trouble to go to your own way in art for the first time? How was that journey?
Well, that's a hard question. I just think it comes from work. I think that you can talk about art, you can theorize about art, you can pontificate about art. You actually just have to do it. And by doing it, it leads you up a particular track. And there's no doubt that some things that I do and have done are quite commercial in the sense that I want people to like this beautiful scarf that this lady is wearing. That's an early scarf of ours. Right? It's not the Sistine Chapel. It's a scarf. And I designed it absolutely as well as I could. And I want people like you to buy it and to wear it. So I think you can find art and good design in all kinds of areas. I spend less time on the academic part of art than I do on the practical part of art.
That's what I mean. Like, I believe, because I've had an experience. When you're taught on an academic way, you're also taught to respect the academic way too much. Like, you sort of see the world through that. And just to have your own first brave step into the opposite way, it's sort of fighting with yourself.
Yeah, well, I think you've also got to accept a lot of it's about failure. Like, you're never quite as good as you want. And not everybody will like everything you do. We're actually, early next year, Julie and I are going to Finland to see the Northern Lights. The only reason I'm going is that when I was about 14, or maybe older, a friend of my uncle's, who was a sign writer, he'd seen the Northern Lights. He commissioned me to do a painting. He described what it was like, and he commissioned me to do the painting, and he said he'd give me £5 for the painting. It's a lot of money. And so I went back and I worked on this picture for about a month. I think it might have been a dead gum tree in the foreground, but it wasn't really Finland. But the idea was there with the swirling lights. Anyway, I took it to him, and I could see the minute he first looked at it, he didn't like it. And he said to me, "It's not like that." And I've never done a commission since that time. I don't want to know what's in it's hard enough for me to find out what's in my head, let alone what's in somebody else's head. But when this trip came out to the Northern Lights, I thought, oh, we'll go there, just have a look and see where there is see where there's a dead gum tree in the foreground somewhere north in Finland. Any more?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Yep.
I don't know if it's an easy one or not, but how did you develop your style? I know you're very much affected by colour and also obviously other artists, but how do you get what's actually Kim done?
I don't look you just before. I'm just going to show you something. See that drawing? That's a drawing of a shell. That's exactly what a shell looks like. That's a very disciplined drawing. So I can draw in that sense of the word. And when I wanted to see whether I could support us, I made a drawing of a shell and a drawing of a basket of carrots, and I had some prints made of it. That's like repeating the singular effort. That's like making something cheap and selling it to shops. In fact, I remember I sold this for like $15, and I think they sold a print for $30. Repeating the singular effort. Hard not to like that shop. So,
Ken, to paint, you really need to draw first.
well, I think it is the bones of it,
Yes.
no matter how you... Let me see if there's any more recent.
You do anything like we went and saw Picasso,
Oh,
his
yeah.
early paintings, and
Yeah.
it was so exacting and so perfect like his father.
Yeah, yeah.
And then where you saw how he, over his life, how he changed. I was
Yeah.
just thinking how much you follow the same line.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you change because you lead yourself into other tracks and you want to surprise yourself. This is a big reef painting, big colourful reef painting. Well, the reef's not like that colour at all. So that's in my head, isn't it? It's in my head about what might come out of it. And there was somewhere. The harbour's not, the city's not yellow. The opera house is not black. The sea's not red. The bridge is not green. And there's, or the next one along there, people on the beach. So it's using colour in a different kind of way. Now, I went to Antarctic last year, and so I made a whole series of paintings about icebergs and about the Antarctic. This is the most successful exhibition that we have ever had. An absolute total sale. We go, and I think it might have been, and I think people were surprised because they're so used to other kinds of paintings of mine that they've got a great response. Sometimes I think, why am I doing this for?
And were the Antarctic paintings large or smaller? I mean,
Quite
some
large.
of your
There was
paintings are very large.
most of them were that large. One of them was in the Wind Prize. It was really good. And obviously you can't go to the Antarctic and sit there on a little stool and paint a penguin.
So you took pictures though, photos? No?
It's in here. It's in here.
You kept
Like,
it,
I'm not going to
you
do
came
it.
back.
Yeah, I'm not actually going to do this painting, but because I've got too much to do. I could do the picture about Elmira in the smoke this morning when I came down that road, you know, because it's in there. And I don't want to paint it precisely what it looks like. I want to paint what it felt like. That's the difference now, I think, between them. This is what Sydney Harbour feels like. It's certainly not what it looks like. I went with a couple of other. We were invited to go to what's the name of that town? Northern Denmark, where Bjørn Utzon lived, and there's a place called the Utzon Centre. And people who painted the Opera House, me and Peter Kingston, Brett Whiteley's dead. An exhibition was mounted there in this little in Utzon's town. And the Opera House doesn't look like that at all. I mean, I walk past the Opera House every day because my gallery's down there. I look, and I'm so changed it in my mind so much that sometimes I think. So it's not the Opera House; it's the feeling of the Opera House, which led to making the sea yellow with blue spots.
That would be disrespectful, but the Opera House never looks blank, does
No,
it?
never looks at all. And yet I've drawn it and painted in endless things. So it's the feeling of something that leads to something else. Even like I've got a big exhibition in Rockhampton at the moment, and it's about reef paintings, and it's the same thing. It's not, they're not photographs of what it looks like under the sea. It's what it feels like, or it's what I want it to be. And it's half a conversation. It's a matter of what you bring to it, or you bring to it, or you bring to it. It's what you feel about it. I've done my bit, and that's it. Move on. We're on the next one.
Yeah, the rest of
Now let's do brain surgery. Don't know.
You painting acrylics?
I painted everything, and literally in everything. There's some new water-based oil paints, sort of controversial terms that I often use. You can paint it. You can paint a Vegemite if you want to. Doesn't matter. Glass water. Yes. Yes. I haven't yet reached my Vegemite series, but it's a. Yeah, all good. All good. And the chapter about Maclean is very important. There's lots of good things in there. All the women in Maclean in those days used to listen to the radio, used to listen to When a Girl Marries. It's called When a Girl Marries. For all those who have been in love with those who have been That was the line. And I remember.
And I think young boys used to listen to Yes What.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But When a Girl Marries, and it was coming to the final episode, there was an Englishwoman who came out. She was the Duchess of Grafton. I wrote about this in the book, and she was coming out to do the official thing. Duchess of Grafton, I suppose. Intercity thing. And my father had to go because he was the deputy Lord Mayor of Maclean, deputy mayor of Maclean. And my mother wouldn't go. And I remember my father being quite upset about it. My mother said, "It's the last episode of When a Girl Marries." I'm not going to Grafton. And probably your mother wouldn't go either.
Story time on as well at the other end of the building.
Story time.
And we have a boy here that we did some of your artwork this morning.
Oh.
That's very, very good.
That is
very nice. Very nice. No, you don't have to come up. You don't have to. Come up. What's your name, mate?
Ollie.
That's
Ollie's mum's nearby. We include a bit of Christmas with it.
Right, it's like a Christmas version of Sydney Harbour. It's got reindeer. That's a really good idea. This is what Ollie's done.
Oh, that's lovely. Let's have a next year.
Come over here. You and I can cover all ours. But see, that's a very, very good example, I think, of something that can lead to something else. It's a good example of how you can. This would be a perfect Sydney Harbour Christmas painting. Put the Santa and the reindeers in the sea. Why not? That's why kids of his age. I can't do work as good as this. Seriously. I'm studying a lot in schools, and if I go to schools around, and the kids, might have been doing versions of opera house pictures, and the whole, classroom, they're all better than mine. All better than mine, little buggers, because they're freer and they don't think about it. They just let us roll. There's nothing that you'll own that's more important than the drawings that your children or your grandchildren give to you. Nothing more important than that. Ollie, you're a triumph. All right, what do you reckon? Any others? Any other questions? Any other?
Just a comment that might let you leave Maclean more contented than when you came. I was talking to a fellow 2 days ago, and his name is Ross Holland.
Oh, Ross.
Yes, he remembers you very well and all the escapades you got up to.
Yeah. Ross Holland, his father, I think he made tanks. And made him a boat out of like a little canoe out of the tank. I was very interested in that. And my other good mate was Max Plater. Max doesn't, I think Max lives down there. And a bloke called, anyway, lovely town. You'll be back.
Thank you. Words, Ken, you can't get away with this. We want to hear about the school days.
Yes, I remember exciting it was when you went to school and primary school there with Lila. You could be home noticed. There's nobody out that came out.
Well, what happened is that they made a program when I was 57, so it's almost 20 years ago. Big luck. Came to Maclean, and he got all the kids that were in the class when I was 7. Right? And we did it at night, up in the high school, which was the old high school. And the deal was, all the kids would video as many of them as possible, and I'd be outside with the cameraman, and we'd switch on the lights, we'd call action, and I'd walk into the room to see kids that I hadn't seen for 50 years. So I was just standing there about to go in, they switched on the lights, they called action, and I suddenly thought, oh, I hope Paul Wallace is not there, because there's this kid called Paul Wallace, he was 9 and we were 7, and used to beat the crap out of us. And the door opened, and he's the first person standing there. The only great thing that had happened, he hadn't grown any taller. He'd only grown wider. And I said to his wife, I said, I used to call him, I said, he was a bloody thug. She said, no, Donald, I call him Donald. No, he's still around.
He is my father-in-law.
He's turned into a very nice man. No, it shows you the redemption of time. I write about him in the book, because he stole my bike once. It's not your fault. When we lived in the Argyle Hotel, in the back of the Argyle Hotel, near where the cook shed was, I made a little garden out of weeds. I had my grandfather's a big penknife. My grandfather, I couldn't open it; it's too tight. I had a big bloody pig sticking thing on. I managed to stick myself with it. The pigs, wild pigs in the plane were safe. Anyway, I was there tending my little weed garden, and well, I used to call it rode right through it, knocked over the bloody weeds, and then stole my little bike and took it down to the swimming bars that were beside the river in those days. And I went home and told my mother. My mother went round to, must have been your grandmother's house. They had words.
They lived in Clyde Street.
In Clyde Street, yeah. They had words. But I just thought the astounding thing is 50 years later, he's standing there and he's turned into a very nice and gentleman. Very nice and gentleman. But he's not tall. Okay?
Thank you very much, Ken. Enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you from us, and now I realise it's not at all very beautiful. It's full of lots of love about that.
Thank you. Well, you can see how much you meant to me. Very good.
I've got a brick.
Oh, right, if you want, yeah.
So, I do have 4 folders here, if you'd like copies of Ken's book here. And that will go through to your gallery, and your staff there will look after that for you. Otherwise, you can all rush down to the book warehouse at Yamba and get a copy there. Thank you all very much.
I just wanted to say, because trying to get it better, see if I get through.
I don't know whether it's money for it. I think
Photo with you.